Hey guys, it's Camus, and welcome to round two of our coverage of Michael Basman's play in the recent Atkins weekend tournament that took place at Torquay around the same time as the British Championship. Years ago, Mike played in many of the British Championships, came close to winning, very close to winning, but of course now at the age of 67, he's more or less retired from serious play, and but I thought it was interesting to cover this tournament to see how he's playing and see how he's doing. Of course, he played all of his games with his bizarre openings, and this game is no exception. Let's get started. His opponent is Alan Pleasance. He's an expert. He's rated 2038. Mike begins the game with 1g4, widely considered to be the worst opening in chess, or close to it. Although, interestingly enough, on chess.com, this is the opening that has the highest ratio of wins for white of any opening. But naturally, that's among a lot of low-rated players. Certainly, the opening has to be taken seriously, even if if Ribka considers that after 1g4, black is already equalized. Without even playing a move. Black is already equal in this position. Anyway, let's continue on with the game. d5. e5, of course, is a very popular alternative. And Basman, rather than playing the bishop g2, that is the hallmark of the Bloodgood, Claude Bloodgood's style of playing it, as he recommends in his book, The Tactical Grob. Basman is not crazy about gambiting the g-pawn, although he has played this way many times in the past. But he prefers a positional approach of h3, although I'm not sure you can consider a positional move in an opening that's so anti-positional as the Grob. But there it is, h3. He wants to hang on to this kingside pawn formation. Now his opponent plays h5. Now this is a natural response, I suppose. He wants to break up these weak black kingside pawns. On the other hand, he's in a way playing into white's hands, because when you play 1g4, you're weakening your king position and casting doubt on your ability to castle on the king side there. When black responds, as he does here, with h5, well, black is also now more or less giving up his ability to castle, at least to castle safely on the king wing. So I'm not sure this is really the best possible response. But anyway, taking the pawn, of course, is probably not a good idea. After pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn, black already has some pressure on white's kingside and the h-pawn in particular. So Basman keeps this part of the board closed for now. He plays g5. Now this is also known as the spike variation. I'm not sure in this particular order. Maybe this is some sort of delayed spike. So g5. Now his opponent plays e5, grabbing a classical center. And Basman immediately chips away at it with d4. And he gives black a choice here. Does he take on d4 or does he push e4? Now, if he pushes e4, something like the following will happen. White will chip away again with c4, and c6 is the principled response, trying to maintain that two-pawn center. Knight c3 puts some more pressure on the d-pawn. Knight e7. This is a normal response to the Grob, and in fact it's the way I recommended to play without the inclusion of h5 in that video I did, how to beat the Grob. The idea is that the knight will come to g6, and then he eyes these weak squares on h4 and f4. But in this line, bishop to d2 is probably best for white. Queen to b6, and you can see the d-pawn is loose at the moment, so protect it with e3. Now, best here is probably bishop to e6, and then queen to c2, knight d7, castles queenside, rook to c8, king to b1, knight to f5, knight g to e2. These are all logical moves. Bishop to e7, h4, queen to c7, knight to f4, bishop to d6, knight takes e6, f takes e6, and after c5, actually white is considerably better. Now, this is Rybka's line, and this is best play for both sides. After, in our variation here, after e3, queen b6, e3, the queen can't take the b pawn. It's the traditional poison pawn because of c5, sealing off queen's retreat. Queen to a3 is possible, trying to get out of dodge. But after knight to b1, queen to b2, bishop to c3, the queen is lost. Alternatively, after c5, the best move according to Rybka is knight to g6, but then after a4, knight to h4, rook to b1, queen to a3, rook to b3, the queen is trapped again. So this e4 variation is after d4 is not a problem for white. So his opponent played the correct response. E takes d4. Naturally, white recaptures. Queen takes d4. And Rybka considers that black is better in this position because, as you can see, after knight c6, queen to a4, knight g to e7, white is falling behind in development. And he also, black has a pawn in the center and white doesn't. So, but there's a lot of game to be played here. Again, this knight g to e7 is the principled response with the idea of knight g6 and knight f4, h4. So Basman plays knight to f3, getting a piece up. And now black makes a very natural move, a move that I can imagine myself playing and many people playing. He plays bishop to d7. But this is not the best possible move. He would have been better off after knight to f3 playing bishop to e6. White could have played something like bishop to d2, a6, crowding the queen a bit here, knight to d4. Of course, he's putting some pressure on this knight, but this knight is well defended. b5, hitting a queen. Knight takes e6. Now black's queen is attacked, and Rybka feels the best sequence here would be f takes e6, queen to b3, knight to f5, and Rybka considers that black has a significant advantage in this position. So this would have been better than what Basman's opponent played. After f3, he played bishop to d7, as we mentioned, threatening a discovery, but it's one of these useless discoveries, and Basman is unafraid. He plays knight to c3. Now, black continues on with his threat, if you want to call it that. Knight to e5. It looks like a logical move, but now queen to b3, and the queen is looking at the b pawn, which is often a weakness in the Grob. And black continues his plan, disrupting the white pawn structure. Knight to f3, check. Naturally, e takes f3. Now this opening of the e file, which black has accomplished, is a bit double-edged, as we'll see. And now black decides he has to do something about his attacked b pawn, and he chooses probably the worst possible response. He plays bishop to c8 here, but he had two other alternatives that were much better. He could play something like bishop to c6. Bishop to f4 would be a good response. Knight to g6, bishop to e3, a5, bishop to b5, a4, queen takes d5, queen takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop to d6, c4. And this is about an equal position. So this would have been better than what he did. But even better than defending the b pawn after e takes f3 would have been knight to c6. Because white really can't afford to take this pawn. Queen takes b7, rook to b8, queen to a6, knight to d4 is hitting the c pawn for threatening a fork, bishop to d3 defending it, bishop to c5, knight takes d5, bishop to c6, c4, bishop takes d5, c takes d5, and now knight to f3 check, king to d1, and now simply castles gives black a significant advantage. Excuse me. Instead of castles, it wouldn't have been so good for him to take the d pawn that's just hanging here, because after queen to a4, king to e7, queen to e4 check, forces the exchange of queens, queen takes e4, bishop takes e4, knight to d4, b3, and black has a small edge, but there's still a lot of play in this position, and white is certainly not losing here. Okay, but his opponent did none of these things. After e takes f3, this is back to the game. He played the undeveloping move bishop to c8, probably the worst choice. And now white just plays natural move here. He plays bishop to e3. And Rybka considers that white is now better in this position. Well, yes, he's ahead in development. So now in this position, you might be thinking, well, can't black play d4? Well, he could, but it would be a bad idea, because after bishop to c4, if he was foolish enough to take the bishop, he would get mated. After bishop takes f7, king to d7, queen to e6 is checkmate. So after bishop to c4, his best course of action would be to play bishop to e6, castles queenside, that pins that d4 pawn, c5, bishop to f4, and white has a big advantage here. So anyway, fortunately for his opponent, he didn't choose to play this d4 move. After bishop to e3, he plays c6, a much better move. And now white castles queenside. Now it's interesting that Grob, as I said, compromises the white king position. But look at this game. White is ahead in development. Black's king is still stuck in the center. And white has got his pieces on pretty aggressive squares. Black only has the knight out, and it's blocking the bishop at the moment. So white is definitely better here. In the game, his opponent chose queen to c7. Bishop to d3 was played. And now bishop to e6. And black is introducing a threat here. He's threatening d4. That uncovers an attack on the queen and picks up the bishop on e3. Now this is a threat that does have to be attended to. So white plays queen to a4. And now black has to wonder how he's going to get his dark squared bishop out. Really, the only sensible way is that would seem to be would be via g7. But Rybka doesn't like this plan. He plays g6 in the position. Instead of g6, he should have probably played b5 and went for an immediate queenside attack. And but then he didn't do that. So after queen a4, he attempts to develop the bishop via g6. And now the rest of the game belongs to white. He plays bishop to f4. This may have been a little bit of a shock. Basman has a real talent for finding moves that his opponents can't predict. He's got a very, I wouldn't say it's an erratic style, but an unusual style. He doesn't think stereotypically. Not that there's anything particularly unorthodox about this particular move, but I'm just speaking in general. His moves can be very hard to predict. So bishop to f4, that's hitting the queen, of course. Queen to b6 is the best move. And now bishop to e5, hitting the rook. So rook to g8 was played. Now, of course, kingside castling is completely out of the question. And this dark square bishop is not going to be able to develop without being exchanged off if white decides he wants to do that. So it looks like white's only option is going to be to castle queenside if he wants to castle at all. And that puts him on a more or less equal footing with white, except it's not equal. As we've mentioned, the white's development is better. Rook h to e1, rook h to e1 was played. But Rybka actually believes that bishop to d4 was perhaps stronger in this position. There's nothing wrong with the rook move, but this little finesse that Rybka cooked up seems a little bit better. After bishop to d4, queen to c7, now rook h to e1, queen to f4 checks, a natural response, king to b1, queen takes f3. Has black won a pawn here? Well, it's not really worth it. Bishop to c5, knight to f5, bishop takes f5, g takes f5, bishop takes f8, rook takes f8, g6, very good move. Now he can't take that pawn because of rook takes e6 check. So he has played rook to g8, and then after g takes f7, king takes f7, white is actually doing very well here. This black king looks very exposed, whereas white's king is safely tucked away from danger. Okay, so Basman missed a perhaps stronger continuation. After rook to g8 in our game, he didn't play bishop to d4. He played rook h to e1. And now, black makes a significant error. What would you do in this position? Well, what you should have done, you should have played castles, queenside. But Rybka assesses this as better for white for many of the reasons we just discussed. Instead, after rook h to e1, he plays bishop to g7, and this is almost losing. White played bishop to f6, excellent move. And white is almost winning here. What he should have done in this position is play bishop to f8. He certainly wouldn't want to take the bishop on f6. After g takes f6, knight to c8, where else is he going to go? Knight to d5. This is completely winning for white. Say a la queen to d8, bishop a6, surprising move. Knight to b6, rook takes e6, good move. F takes e6, f7 check, king to f7, queen to f4 check, king to g7, knight takes b6, queen takes b6, rook to d7 check, king to h8, queen to h6 is mate. That's pretty much best play according to Rybka after bishop takes f6. So that would have been a serious blunder. Let's go back to the game here. After bishop to f6, he made another blunder. He played queen to c5. And now he gets into serious trouble after queen to f4. You can see that white owns the board here. Rook to d8, knight to a4, hitting the queen. Queen to d6, hoping to exchange off, relieve some of this pressure. But of course, white is having none of it. Plays queen to d4. And now he's threatening to take the bishop on g7, as well as hitting the a pawn. So black decides he has to get out of this situation on the e file. So he plays king to f8. I guess his alternative was he could have tried bishop to f6 here, but after g takes f6, knight to f5, bishop takes f5, g takes f5, queen to a7, king to f8, queen to b7. White is winning this position. All right, so after queen to d4 in our game, he instead, as I said, decided to get out of dodge, king to f8. And now Basman plays, he plays this whole part of the game flawlessly, actually. Knight to c5. This is pretty deadly. And now his opponent plays bishop to c8. trying to protect this b pawn. But I suppose he's actually already lost here. Rook to e8 was better, but also loses after knight to b7, hitting the queen, queen to b8, knight to c5, queen to d6, rook to e2, knight to c8, rook d to e1, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, g5, king to b1, queen to f4, queen to c3, a5, rook to e6, check, exclam, f takes e6, knight takes e6, hitting the queen, rook takes, king to f7, rook takes c6. White still has his attack, and he's got a whole lot of extra pawns, so this is winning for white. So this was actually black's best shot after our game continuation. This is a position after knight to c5. He played bishop to c8, protecting the b pawn. And now, see if you can spot a move for white in this position. Well, the game ended immediately after rook to e7. And this wins a piece and the game. Black resigned here in light of bishop to f6, g takes f6, b6, knight to b7, bishop takes b7, rook to b7. White is, so white is just simply a clear piece up, and black's king still looks like in a very uncomfortable situation. So another pretty smooth performance from Basman. I mean, he only missed one better continuation. Of course, I suppose you could argue that his main mistake in this game was playing 1g4, but he made it work for him. And as I mentioned in the other video, he thrives on these chaotic positions, and has got a really good sense of how to play with these pawn structures. So I think some of the later games in this tournament, he doesn't do quite as well, but he manages to outplay his opponents in worse positions just by virtue of probably the psychological effect of everybody knows who he is and how he plays these openings. And of course, he's also higher rated than his opponents. So we'll look forward to seeing you for round 3 of this tournament coming to a theater near you very soon. Thank you for watching.